Hey everyone, so these will just be my thoughts and opinions here on using a Garmin Epix Gen 2 Pro. This is 51mm version versus using the Samsung Watch 5 Pro, Samsung Galaxy Watch 5 Pro here on the left. So again, this is 51mm, so this is a bigger watch than this is, and the weight of it is probably about double of what the Samsung is. But first, I want to talk about the designs of them. So I do like the way both of these look, but I do prefer the Garmin having 5 buttons. We only have 2 over here. This means I can use either the touchscreen. If I turn it on, I don't have it turned on, but I can use the touchscreen to do whatever, or I can use these 5 buttons to do whatever. And again, I usually just use the 5 buttons, whereas with the Samsung, you have got to use the touchscreen. Otherwise, it just isn't going to work. You only have 2 buttons, and yes, you can do things with those buttons, but not everything like you can with the Garmin. On the way they both look, I do like the way both of them look. I do prefer bigger watches. Both of these are bigger watches, with the Garmin being bigger than the Samsung, but I do like the way both of these look. And you can customize both of these. Amazon has a crazy amount of bands and cases and stuff for both of these, but a lot more for the Samsung, especially case-wise. Garmin, you can get a few different cases for it. They just don't really fit too well. But band-wise, there is a crazy amount of different bands. It takes this one, the 51mm, takes these 26mm bands. While we're talking about bands here, this you just pop on off, and you can pop them back on ridiculously easy. Whereas again, Samsung, you can get more bands, a crazy amount of different cases for it. Make this thing very customizable. Make it your own. But these bands are a lot more of a pain in the butt. It has this little mechanism here. I'm not going to take it off because it's hard for me to get them back on. They pop right off, but popping them back on, you have to kind of line it up on one side, push this thing in, line it up on the other side, get it in there. It's a lot easier sounding than it actually is. It takes me a few minutes to get them on. Taking them off again is very easy. Bring them on, not so much. This, again, pop off, pop on. Super easy. But again, customizable wise, you can get a lot more stuff for the Samsung than you can for the Garmin, if that matters to you. But again, you can get a whole bunch of bands for either. Then both of these are titanium and sapphire, which means that the lenses themselves are made of sapphire, which is almost indestructible, almost very hard to break either of the lenses here. But you can see even with the titanium though, with my Garmin, which I've had for a while now, it is very much scratched up because it is a big watch and I keep smacking it on like everything. My Samsung I've only had for a few days. I have only worn it out and about a couple of times, and it is still in perfect shape because I haven't smacked it against anything yet. Talking about their displays, both of these have nice, big, bright, beautiful displays on them here. But I do prefer the way Garmin does their always on display. So both of these have the always on display turned on right now. They'll keep turning off because they're not on my wrist. But the Garmin goes very dim until it's kind of hard to explain, but when you raise your wrist, it gets slightly brighter, and then you can hit that, it'll get the brightest. Whereas Samsung, it will stay at the same brightness when you raise your wrist. And then when you hit some or tap or whatever, it'll get a little bit brighter. But now, of course, both of these, you can turn up the brightness or down the brightness of them. Again, hard for me to explain, but I just prefer the way Samsung does it. I think it also helps saving the battery. But otherwise, both of these are very nice, bright, beautiful displays. And then let's quickly talk about battery life here. Both of these are actually rather good. But of course, the Garmin blows the Samsung out of the water, blows pretty much any other watch with an AMOLED display out of the water. So with always on display turned on, I can get over a week of battery. That's even with doing some exercises in there. With the Samsung, I can get maybe 2.5 days with always on display turned on, with a little bit of exercising as well, which is really good for a smartwatch. But it just, again, this is over a week. This is maybe 2 days, 2.5 days. If you turn off always on display, of course, you can get more. Garmin claims up to, I think it's around 30 days in smartwatch mode for the Garmin. This is, I think they claim 80 hours. So, what's that, like 3 or 4 days. Then let's talk about the smartwatch features here. So with the Samsung, of course, being a full-blown smartwatch, you can reply to text, you can send out text, you can answer phone calls from the watch itself. This one here is the LTE version, so I can basically take this watch if I have LTE service on it. I can take the watch out without my phone and still get text messages and phone calls and stuff like that through the watch itself. Whereas the Garmin here does not have LTE whatsoever. It's not a possibility, at least not here in the US. Smartwatch features, it does have some. There's a lot more watered down. It can be hooked up to iOS or Android. Hook up to iOS, you can see your messages, your emails, see if more people are calling you. You can answer the phone call, but then you have to pick up your phone. You cannot reply through iOS messaging through here whatsoever. If you have it hooked up to Android, you get a little bit better. You can, again, you can see phone calls, you can answer the phone call. You have to pick up the phone, though, not through the watch itself. And you can see your messages and your emails, and you can do quick replies to your messages, but you cannot actually type them out like you can on the Samsung. So it is a watered down version of the smartwatch features for texting and calling and stuff like that than what you would get with the Samsung. But you still do get other smartwatch features, like it has Garmin Pay on it, which I've heard is very good. You also get, just like you would with Samsung Pay on the Samsung here, you also get a flashlight, which is really, really cool. It's that, or it's also, which is red, or it's also white, and it is freaking bright, where you do not get an actual flashlight on the Samsung, but you can make the screen brighter. Then, of course, there's a bunch more apps you can get on the Samsung than you can on Garmin. Yes, you can get a bunch of apps for Garmin as well, but they're just not as many as you can for Samsung. Then I want to talk about actual exercising here. So I've used both of these for some walks and for some treadmill and stuff like that. The Garmin is so much better, just for the sheer fact that you can go back into your app and you can edit your distance and stuff like that for any sort of cardio. So like on the treadmill says one thing and what these two say is way different, of course, because watches are just not that great for treadmill tracking. But again, I can go into the Garmin app and I can change that distance to the actual distance the treadmill said. Samsung, yes, you can see the distance and stuff, but you cannot change it. There's no way I could figure out how to change that distance, which is very annoying, because this thing was way off, just like the Garmin is way off from what the treadmill said. Now, outside, both of them are pretty accurate. As far as I know, at least they're both pretty close to each other. But again, if you wanted to change the distance, you cannot do so on the Samsung that I could figure out a way to do. Whereas Garmin, you can easily just go in and change your activity distance and a whole bunch of other things. All in all, both of these are very nice watches, but I would say personally I do prefer Garmin. I'm just not that big of a texter or phone call person, so it was very cool on here, but I do prefer more of the some of the stuff that Garmin throws at you. Instead of like this flashlight I use almost every night, just go use the bathroom in the middle of the night. Or I love the way this display slightly gets brighter when you actually look at it. Stuff like that is just really cool. And again, this is way more money than this is. I mean, you're talking like 3-4 times the price here. But personally, I do prefer Garmin, but Samsung is a very cool watch. The one last thing I did not mention is if you are big into walking, running, hiking, stuff like that, the Garmin here has a built-in topo map, which is insanely awesome. Samsung does not whatsoever. There's no way I could figure out how to get one on here from all my research, unless you're doing like actual navigation where you're trying to walk somewhere, not just in the exercise app itself. But yeah, you all let me know what you think. Oh, and you can, I should say too, you can put in routes on here, then you can get it. But just going out and about without a route in them, this gives you extra map. This does not. Thank you all for watching. Let me know what you think. As always, I appreciate you. Hope you have a good one.